Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first on the hazardous weather graphic, we've got blizzard warning out for the eastern Arctic coast. That's until, I believe, 7 p.m. this evening, and that's for the winds that have been gusting 40 to 55 miles an hour up there. Still producing some whiteout conditions or visibilities lower than a quarter mile at times due to blowing snow. And on the west side here, we've got a winter weather advisory out for the western Arctic coast, and that's out until early this evening as well, which time it'll end as conditions improve. And that's for winds 20 to 40 miles an hour in gusts and blowing snow occasionally, possibly reducing visibilities less than a half a mile at times there. Nothing going on watch warning advisory wise for the north slope into the Brooks Range, but a winter storm warning is out here for the Kobuk Valley area for 3 to 7 inches of snow, along with winds gusting 45 miles an hour. Now reduced visibilities to a quarter mile or less at times in this area. And that's out until 6 p.m. tomorrow evening. So through tonight and through tomorrow. And then conditions improve tomorrow evening. Otherwise, the remainder of the yellow shaded areas here, that's winter weather advisories that are due to end here at by early this evening, early Friday evening. For that was out for the 3 to 5 inches of snow has fallen across the area here, and then the winds gusting 25 to 40 miles an hour across many areas. Very windy day today in the central interior, and that blowing snow reduced visibilities as well. But that's due to improve, will improve early this evening, and it'll dry out overnight tonight ahead of the next batch of moisture that comes on in actually during the day tomorrow, back into the snow here. That's why there's a winter storm warning out for the Ambler area, and probably will go back into the advisory level there for the Galena zone. Otherwise, no watches, warnings, or advisories for southern Alaska or the Aleutians, Bering Sea, or the Panhandle for the next day or so. And we've got this washed out trailing edge of a weakening front just dragging across the Panhandle. It's brought some variable clouds in today, no precipitation, bigger mass of moisture here gathering, and that's going to be coming on in later tonight and tomorrow here, with precipitation spreading back eastward, looking for snow to increase south central Alaska after midnight and toward morning. And the moisture that brought the snow today, along with the gusty winds, or accompanied by the gusty winds, that's shifting eastward here. First batch already into Canada, this one following right in behind, moving through. You can see the clouds thin out as you head back toward the Seward Peninsula. There was some sunshine today at St. Lawrence Island, but more clouds upstream there, keeping it in the snow showery pattern there, with breezy conditions and a lot of clouds up over the north slope and the Arctic coast. And again, those conditions will be improving this evening as well. And then this moisture will move out, and the dry air will come in, and then this moisture will roll back in for tomorrow. But for today, you can see the areas of snow moving through. Again, the amounts are quite varied and variable here, with the strongest winds occurring, looks like over the north central interior, just south of the Brooks Range, and then also over the north slope. Gusts 40 miles an hour, 35 miles an hour over the north slope. Umiat Airfield, for example, gusts 55 miles an hour at Kaktovik, as well as Cape Lisburne. But those winds are coming down now, as you see the gradient slackening, and also kind of a break here for St. Lawrence Island. Another trough, more snow showers just to your southwest, and pretty good area, high pressure, but it's well south of Kodiak, but far enough north in its extension to keep it dry over southern Alaska today, with just varying amounts of clouds, and not too bad over the Panhandle, even with that dissipating front. For tomorrow, high pressure redevelops out here over the west central Bering Sea ahead of the next big storm out over the Sea of Okhotsk, and the front tries to push into the Kamchatka Peninsula here or pushes past tonight, but stays no farther east than the Komodorskis, at least through tonight. And then we have this cold front here with snow and lower or colder temperatures behind that. So it looks like snowfall levels coming back down to sea level here behind the front. A little bit of a warmer push in advance of that for mixed precipitation up into Cook Inlet. Northern Cook Inlet probably staying in the form of snow, wet snow, and snow in the interior pushing eastward here tonight. And so kind of a short break coming through, drying out, less wind, definitely less wind tonight over the interior as wind's already coming down. High pressure, light winds, and variable clouds for the panhandle, definitely dry. And then the outlook for tomorrow, increasing chances of moisture, rain along the central and north coast and Lincoln Island Glacier Bay, rain or snow, North Gulf Coast. And colder air coming back in, gusty winds, 35, 50 miles an hour here for the western Alaska Range, Aleutian Range into Kodiak Island, and lower temperatures. That'll dry it out for Kodiak, coming mostly sunny in the afternoon. And then snow moving through south central Alaska, anywhere from low elevations, probably maybe an inch of wet slop, and higher elevations could pick up several inches, and more snow again coming into the east central interior areas. A couple of troughs up here keeping the snow shower chance going all the way back to the western Arctic coast. Strong high pressure over the Bering Sea keeps this system out to the west, and we'll see on Sunday that really pushes up into the Arctic, and part of it breaks off and spreads snow coming over the top of the ridge here and gusty winds back into the northwest interior. Some of that spilling down to some extent into the Yukon Delta for some light snow. Winds may be gusting 25, 30 miles an hour. Kuskokwim Delta, though, just variable clouds, risk of a snow shower, and winds much lighter, very strong high pressure holding over the southeast Bering Sea, western Bristol Bay, and dry, windy Kodiak Island, colder temperatures south central Alaska, especially overnight periods here, even in the eastern interior areas. And the panhandle drying out, that system dropping southeastward quite rapidly, so be a drastic improvement in conditions during the day on Sunday from north to south, northwest to southeast as that pulls off. And the precipitation should end even over the southern areas down toward Dixon Entrance by late in the afternoon. And for the lows down that way for tonight, lower to mid-30s here for the southeast coast, mid-teens to mid-20s for the Copper River Basin, and in the 20s south central Alaska, actually all of southern Alaska here near 30 all the way up into the Kobuk Valley. Chillier, but above zero for the North Slope and the Arctic coast here. Lows tonight, followed by highs tomorrow. A little cooler, not much warming there. Highs in the mid-teens on the western Arctic coast, North Slope, lower 20s east side. And generally, most areas rising a shade above freezing in the interior, 30 to 35 for the highs. But the colder air out here, lower 20s, St. Lawrence Island, in the 20s for the Seward Peninsula, all the way down to Nunivak Island, mid-30s for the Pribilofs, and right near freezing for the Yukon River Valley area and Delta, lower 40s Kodiak Island, mid to upper 30s Alaska Peninsula, and near 40 for the Central Aleutians, 40 to 45 there for the Panhandle. And for the Sunday morning lows, much colder, back below zero, 5 to 15 below, give or take there for the North Slope and Arctic coast, and a little above zero through the Brooks Range here. Kotzebue low 4, 8 at Shishmaref, 11 Nome, lower to mid-teens central interior. Susitna Valley down to the 10 to 15 degree range, as well as the Copper River Basin. Teens again all the way down Kenai Peninsula, Anchorage area, but lower 30s for Kodiak, lower teens for the Bristol Bay zone, and not much of a cooling going on over the Panhandle with lows lower to mid-30s, even warmer down to the south, and mid-30s for the Central Aleutians. Highs on Sunday, 40 to 45 southeast coast, and near 30 Copper River Basin, lower to mid-30s for the Kenai Peninsula, Madawaska-Susitna Valley, 25 to 30 central interior, and 5 to 15 above for the Arctic coast, Brooks Range, and North Slope. Out west, mid-30s from St. Lawrence Island to the Pribilofs.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving along to the fine weather graphics here. Break, VFR, Central Aleutians up across the Pribilofs tomorrow, marginal VFR, St. Lawrence Island. A lot of IFR coming in with that trough swinging southeastward here. Bristol Bay, all of southwest Alaska, Kuskokwim Valley, and even areas all the way up to the Brooks Range. Better though on the eastern North Slope and Arctic coast, and also quite a bit of VFR over the eastern interior, some marginal VFR over 40-mile country, upper Tanana Valley. IFR, Kodiak Island, spreading into Cook Inlet, and just south of Prince William Sound. VFR starts out the day for southeast Alaska, and then that becomes marginal VFR, and may go, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay may actually go IFR, probably early evening the way it looks right now, but IFR shifting eastward here across southern Alaska, Prince William Sound, into the Tanana Valley and White Mountains, breaking up a little here toward across the Yukon Flats into the Brooks Range, improving back to the west slowly. Marginal VFR giving way to actually VFR here over the Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island, all the eastern Bering Sea with building high pressure, and then a zone of IFR pushing its way in toward the central Bering Sea across AKwx, probably go marginal for Atka in the afternoon. And then that kind of tilts here, AKwx back into the IFR, back into the VFR, with the IFR off to the west, and then that's slipping up towards St. Lawrence Island, mostly toward Gamble, marginal for Savunga, and St. Paul, St. George, VFR, as well as Southeast Bering Sea, Eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island. Much improved over the interior here, some lingering marginal stuff along the Alaska Range, Eastern Interior, otherwise becoming VFR most areas, and IFR there over the southeast coast. And for the afternoon, that drops on down quite rapidly there and becomes VFR across the Panhandle, and IFR pushes back into the west coast here, mostly from Nunivak Island northward to the western Arctic coast. Central Eastern Interior, good VFR. Nothing but VFR for Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, southern Alaska, and across the Gulf as well. And IFR slips on up to the AKwx area, but just north of there, some VFR into the Fox Islands. Anaktuvik, tomorrow, marginal VFR with possible IFR on the southern entrance. Same thing for Adigan, marginal with lowest conditions south side. And for the Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR, both passes. Rainy IFR, windy IFR, as well as Isabel looking IFR most of the day. And for Mentasta, starting out marginal, becoming IFR as that moisture slides eastward. And Tanita, marginal VFR, becoming IFR. And for, let's see, Portage, starting out pretty good. Looks like it started out VFR, but rapidly conditions coming down to IFR, definitely by late in the afternoon. And Chilkoot and White, VFR becoming marginal. And for freezing levels, colder air coming back down, but not initially here tomorrow morning at the surface North Gulf Coast, but 2,000 feet now back off the coast here across the Alaska Peninsula, and even colder air coming in tomorrow night. And then for icing, could be some heavier stuff here along the Prince William Sound area, North Gulf Coast. This whole mass shifting from really east to west, and so improving here back to the west, losing the icing in the western interior and along the west coast in the afternoon. You'll get that tonight. And out here to the west, just a slight risk with that really washed out front, trying to push some icing threats in towards Chimney-Attu. Jet stream, high pressure building over the Bering Sea. That's going to help drop that trough right on in, the cold upper level low, right into the Kenai Peninsula by midday tomorrow or tomorrow afternoon. Even colder upper trough here on the Arctic coast. 9,000 feet, westerly flow basically a little lighter here, pretty light and more variable. Southern Alaska with this low pulling that 35-knot wind across Kodiak Island, up to 50 knots there across the Alaska Peninsula, otherwise lighter over the ridge, and then back up to 50 knots toward Chimney-Attu. 3,000 feet, about 35 knots out there, light and variable into the ridge, and not too bad even coming over the top there, but pretty brisk winds all down the west side here, southwest coast, Kodiak Island, as this low drops into the Gulf of Alaska, but lighter winds to the north. And turbulence-wise, light to isolated moderate chop here along the Arctic coast, moderate, isolated severe for small aircraft here, lee side of the Aleutian Range, Kamishak Bay, and Kodiak Island.
So the That Galena flood back in 2013 was at the intersection of weather and climate. Rick, I often get questions about the difference between weather and climate. How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, that's a really good question, John. One of the analogies that I like to use, the wardrobe analogy. So in my closet, in my dresser, I've got clothes appropriate for 90-degree weather and 50 below weather. That's the climate part of my wardrobe. But what I'm going to put on today, am I going to wear my Hawaiian shirt because it's going to be a hot July day, or am I going to wear my bunny boots because it's going to be 50 below? That's the weather part of my wardrobe.
You know, there's another interesting analogy. I've heard it said that climate is like your personality, whereas weather is like the mood you're in today. It's like that old John Denver song. Some days are diamonds and some days are stones. That's how weather works.
Of course, it's really a continuous range. Just as the Galena ice jam flooding was the result of a weather event, that ice jam, up against that cold spring, a climate event. So too with less impactful events. For instance, a daily record high temperature is a weather event, one day's high. But we put that in a climate context, say comparing to a century or more of individual temperatures on a given date.
So these extreme events like record high temperatures also happen on the seasonal time scale. Just in the last few years, we've had what was called a marine heat wave in the waters south of Alaska, the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. But the water temperatures in that area set new records in 2015 and 2016.
And most Alaskans are acutely aware that big wildfire seasons are becoming more and more common, most recently in 2015. And the frequency of million-acre seasons has doubled since the early 1990s.
Just this past winter, we had another event in the Bering Sea. The ice extent in the Bering was lower than it had ever been in the last 150 years. That's about as far back as the good records go. There'd never been another year like this one in the Bering with so little sea ice. That had major impacts on the communities along the west coast and the northwest coast.
So, John, what have you been hearing from folks around town about these kind of climate extremes?
I've heard from a number of people who've been here a long time that winters just aren't what they used to be. The average temperatures are higher than they were back in the 1960s and 1970s, and we just don't get the extreme cold days, the days down in the minus 50s or even the minus 60s that we used to experience in Fairbanks back in the 1960s, 1970s, and even into the 1980s.
Well, and it's not just winter either. 2016 and 2017, the summers brought unusually muggy, humid weather to Fairbanks. We're not used to thinking of that in interior Alaska, but record high humidities during the summer months. As in the winter, we've had a significant increase in freezing rain events, since about 2000. So much so that DOT has changed their road treatment strategy, and now we have the school district building in winter rain days into the calendar. And of course, we all need good weather forecasts for these high impact weather events.
We know, though, that weather forecasts are sometimes wrong just 3 or 4 days in advance. So if these weather forecasts and the models they're based on can't pick up events like freezing rain 3 or 4 days ahead, how can we believe what they say about climate for the future?
Well, that's a really good question, John. And I think the important thing to remember is that parts of the system are predictable.
So climate models can't give you weather for particular days or even for particular months or years. They actually predict averages. These are averages over periods of a decade or two, or even averages over periods of several years. So they don't give us the month-to-month information that we might want. What are they telling us about the future, though?
Well, these climate models are telling us on the decades-long time frames that warmer winters are going to become more common. We're going to have more frequent, very low sea ice years with late freeze up and early meltout. And the same will be true on Alaskan rivers. We'll have more frequent seasons when freeze up is late and break up is early.
One of the other common threads in these climate model predictions is that heavy rain events and heavy snow events will become more common in the future. That's actually a prediction that the models make for mid-latitudes as well as for high latitudes in areas like Alaska. So we can expect the heavy downpours to become heavier and the heavy winter snows to become heavier than we've been used to. They're also predicting more frequent freezing rain events, getting back to what you talked about earlier. These events that might have happened just once every year or two in the past could actually end up happening several times in a winter in the future, according to the climate models.
And it is important to remember that even in a warming world, there are still going to be seasons and years that are colder than the average, but these cold seasons will become less and less common. So, John, maybe I don't need to have those bunny boots in my closet anymore?
Well, at least you won't need to wear them as often as you did in the past.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello again, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this segment. Marine forecast, coastal water forecast over the southeast coast. On the south coast of the Panhandle, westerlies at 15 knots, lighter southwest breeze on the north coast, seas 6 to 8 feet, up to 9 feet in the south coast, and variable winds 10 knots, central southern inside waters, Lynn Canal south at 15, 3-foot seas. Outlook for Sunday, gale force northerlies coming into Lynn Canal there, sustained 35 knots. Small craft advisories, Stevens Passage, north 25, seas building to 5 feet, 15-knot northerlies for Clarence Strait. And on the south coast, north winds at 25 knots, and gales here for the central and north coast, out of the north and northeast, up to 40 knots, strongest on the north coast with 9 to 11-foot seas. And Prince William Sound tomorrow, southeast at 15, south 20 knots there for the eastern North Gulf Coast, and then small craft advisories on the western zone and west 30 knots for the Barren Islands. Gales west 35 knots, Kamishak Bay, and then northwest 15 for southern Cook Inlet. Northern Cook Inlet about 10 knots out of the north. And then for Sunday, Cook Inlet northwest 10 to 15 knots and seas 3 feet south of the Forelands. 40-knot gale here for Kamishak Bay out of the northwest, Barren Islands northwest 35 knots, and 30-knot winds from the north-northwest for the North Gulf Coast, seas 8 to 9 feet. Prince William Sound increase in the winds as well. Small craft advisory sustained out of the northwest at 25 with 6-foot seas. And for the Kodiak Island area, westerlies 30 to 35 knots, so good gales here on the eastern side of the islands, and seas at about 12 feet, and Sitkinak to Castle Cape, northwest 35. Seas 10 feet, and northwesterlies 25 to 30 knots across the Alaska Peninsula. Bristol Bay, northwest, sustained 30-knot winds for small craft advisories there with 4-foot seas. And then we've got winds coming down considerably, 15 knots for Bristol Bay, and seas down to 1 foot. And the Alaska Peninsula north, 15 knots, so a big decrease there as well. Small craft advisories, Kodiak Island and Shelikof Strait, west-northwest, 25 to 30 knots, 6 to 11-foot seas. Fox Islands for tomorrow, northwest to northeast winds, 15 to 20 knots, 7-foot seas. Adak and Atka, northeast 10 to 20, and southerlies increasing to 30 knots for the far western Aleutians, those seas building up to 12 feet. And then on Sunday, those go easterly out there, come down to 20 knots, seas still around 10 feet though, and then we got 30-knot winds for small craft advisories out of the east here pretty uniform pattern now for the much of the Aleutian chain, all out of the east, all the way over to Unalaska Island at 30 knots. But of course, Unalaska Island, though, down to 20 to 25 knots, 5 to 10 foot seas, but seas here in the central Aleutian as high as 15 feet on the Pacific side of the islands. Southwest coast, west-northwest, 20 to 25 knots tomorrow, northwest 20 for the Pribilof, southwest 25 St. Matthew Island, and west 20 knots St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, and south 25 knots Norton Sound, southwest 25 knots here, Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, as well as St. Matthew Island, and south winds much lighter there, closer into the high center, 15 knots for the Pribilofs, Kuskokwim Delta coast, 15 knots out of the west. Beaufort Sea on the east side there, west-southwest 15 to 20, strongest toward demarcation point, and west winds of 15 on the central Arctic coast, northwest 15 here, all the way down to Cape Thompson to Wales, a little stronger, northwest at 20. And then brisk wind advisories here from Wales all the way up to Cape Beaufort at 25 knots, up to Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, 30 knots, sustained 20-knot winds out of the south on the western coast, turning southwest on the central coast, and then west 20 knots, but increases to 30 knots for brisk wind advisories in that eastern zone to demarcation point. And for tonight, we've got a cold front with more snow coming into the interior here, low center approaching Cape Neuenhammer, so another weak one over the Seward Peninsula, and then an even weaker one off the western Arctic coast. So it'll dry out. You see a break, short-lived here, eastern interior, or the central interior, and stays dry over the panhandle. Then tomorrow, rain chances increase here along the north coast mainly, and snow across south central Alaska, varying amounts depending on your elevation, heavier, maybe a few inches at the higher elevations, and pretty much wet slop down towards sea level, with chances of snow in the central interior extending back to the northwest coast, and strong high pressure ridges right in across southern and eastern Alaska on Sunday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.